I guess in a country town you live about 10 minutes from every sports facility, so we could play basketball one night, tennis the next. We could fit multiple sports into one night. So I started with gymnastics and ballet and then moved on to little athletics and netball, tennis, basketball. But netball was always a favourite, and then the cross country.
Ever wonder what it's like to be an athlete on the world's biggest stage? What really goes on inside the village? Let's find out.
Legends with Bevo. The road to Tokyo. Thanks to Anytime Fitness Glenelg. Renelec Electrical Services.
Well, Jess Trengove, great to have you on again. We've chatted in the past, but this time it's about your Olympic experience on the road to Tokyo. Great to have you on, and how you been going since we last spoke?
Thanks. Yeah, well, I think that was in 2019. I was pregnant with Billy, is that right?
You're correct, yes.
So a bit has happened. In November of that year, I gave birth to Billy. So he's now 20 months old, and he's a bundle of energy. He's a lot of fun. I love motherhood. It's it's interesting. I became a new mum and we had about 3 months of normality before COVID-19 sort of changed the world as we knew it. And, watching Billy grow and develop through that time, it's been so special having him in our lives, and running hasn't exactly gone to plan at times. I've had quite a few hurdles with race cancellations and whatnot, but having that perspective as a mum has really, been incredible.
Congratulations on little Billy. And,
Thank you.
And let's hope there's another one in the future for the Trengove family.
Thank you.
Now, we'll get back to your journey, Jess. It's been a very interesting one. Obviously, you had your brother Jack, who's gone on to play great footy at Port Adelaide. He was the captain of Melbourne back in the day as well. But talked us through your journey growing up, and was there a rivalry between you and Jack? Did you, who I guess, won the races between you both, that sort of thing?
Well, I'm glad that Jack does love running. We actually really enjoy running together now. He's living in Adelaide at the moment and playing footy for the Old Scholars team, and we get to go for some jogs together, and that, I guess, shared love for running did start from a young age. So he's 4 years younger than me, and we grew up in the southeast in Narracourt, and I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me as well, and we enjoyed every sport that we could basically poke a stick at, really. I guess in a country town you live about 10 minutes from every sports facility, so we could play basketball one night, tennis the next. We could fit multiple sports into one night. So I started with gymnastics and ballet and then moved on to little athletics and netball, tennis, basketball. But netball was always a favourite, and then the cross country. And Jack and I and Abby as well would train a bit for cross country and for sports days. I remember, Mum and Dad would often be quite busy after school with work, and we'd had a babysitter some nights, and we'd make a little discus at home. We had a sand pit, and we practiced all of the different sports day events in the lead up. So we had that determination and drive to do well from a young age. And initially I was the tall one, the stronger one, because I was the oldest, and I'd sort of have, say, a basketball tussle against Abby and Jack. And then as time went on, Abby became taller than me. Jack was taller than both of us, and it started to be Abby and I onto Jack, and he leaves me for dead in most sports battles now, particularly table tennis. And if we ever have a hit of golf, actually there's nothing other than the marathon really that I can think of where I'd beat Jack at the moment.
Sounds a bit like my family, very sporting family growing up as well, with lots of rivalries with a younger brother and a younger sister. So I know all about that. Good times. And your Olympic experience, Jess, growing up as a kid, what was your Olympic experience like? Who did you sort of look up to? I know personally mine was Linford Christie was my favourite, and talking of the running side of things, but what about you?
So my first memories of the Olympics would have been vaguely maybe Atlanta. I think I did a school project, and that's when I started to really develop an interest in the Olympics, in the movement, and just the values. And I think at school we talked about all of the different countries, coming together. And then in 1996, it was Barcelona 92, 96 Atlanta Olympics. That's when I have some really strong memories of coming home from school, turning on the TV, and particularly watching our swimmers. I remember Susie O'Neill, Kieran Perkins, and just being inspired and thinking I would love to be an Olympian one day. And that's when I was 8 years old, and I was sort of daring to dream, and I had that big goal that I put out there, and I asked for an alarm clock for my birthday, thinking I'd get up every morning and swim laps, hoping to make it to the Olympics one day. Swimming doesn't really come naturally to me. I fought the water, and I think after 2 mornings I decided swimming wasn't my Olympic sport. But in the year 2000, that's when we had the opportunity as a family to go to the Olympics. So that was a dream come true for me. And Kathy Freeman was a huge inspiration, but a really personal moment that I have that stands out in my memory was sitting in the stands on one night of the athletics. I think it was the men's 10,000 and the women's 5,000 heats, and there was an Australian in the heat named Benita Willis, and she completed the 12.5 lap race and then came into the grandstand to see her family who was sitting near us. So I sort of jumped up with my sister and we waved our tickets, and she came and had a chat to us, and she became my sporting hero. And we actually ended up on the team together for the London Olympics in the marathon. So by that stage, she'd stepped up in distance, and she's still someone I talk to today and seek advice from. She's been an incredible role model.
What an amazing story.
Yeah.
That is one of the coolest things I've ever heard. Wow. And your own experience with the Olympics, 2012 was your very first one. What was the feeling like when you found out you were going to be competing at your first Olympics, Jess?
I can still remember my very first marathon in Nagoya in Japan in March of 2012. I didn't really know what to expect. There seemed to be nothing to lose in this attempt to run a marathon with that Olympic qualifying time in mind of 2 hours and 32 minutes. So my coach and I flew to Japan together, and I was really just in there to experience the marathon and see how I'd go over the distance. And at halfway, I remember feeling like my muscles were just cramping a little bit and thought, oh dear, this could be a long road home. But kind of kept going. And then at 34 kilometres, I remember seeing Adam in the crowd, and he was bouncing around excitedly saying, "You're on pace." And that really just fired me up. And I thought, I'm on pace to make the Olympic team. And even though my legs were almost giving way on me, I remember my hamstrings twinging and all sorts going on. I just had that Olympic goal at the front of my mind and entered the stadium, and I saw 2:31 flash over on the digital clock, and I had to get under 2:32. So I just had a short, sprint home. It wasn't a sprint at the time, but crossed the line, and that was sort of that Olympic dream come true. So I then had a few months to get myself recovered and ready to compete at my first Olympics.
Phenomenal. What an amazing achievement. And I could just imagine how that feeling, knowing that you'd actually qualified for it as well. And yeah, you mentioned, or you sort of briefly touched on it just before, the lead up to the Olympics. Obviously with swimmers and that sort of thing, they can, regularly swim their laps every day and what have you. And, especially the short distance swimmers, they can prepare them ready for races on the actual Olympic stage. How does a marathon runner though prepare for your very first Olympics, if that makes sense?
2012 Olympic preparation was very different to 2016, because in 2012 I hadn't really, set myself up to go to the Olympics that year. I was still working. I think it was almost full time at a physio clinic, and suddenly you make the team. Well, to be honest, I didn't know I'd made the team until June, which is when the final selection was made. So from March until June, I had this nervous wait to see whether anyone else would run faster than me and take my spot. So when I was finally secured on the team in June, I had a lot of paperwork to fill out. You've got, uniform sizing charts, you've got media, commitments, and you sort of, it's just a whirlwind. And I remember actually being really stressed. I'm trying to get the best training of my life done with all of these other things going on. So when I finally got to Tonbridge, which is a beautiful community in outer London in England, where we trained for, I think it was about 2 weeks before the Olympics, I just felt relieved I could finally just focus on the job at hand, and really enjoyed that time at the camp. I did go to the opening ceremony, which was, I think, a week before my race, or maybe a little bit longer before my race, and that was a huge event. We were sort of on our feet all night, got home at, I think, 3 a.m. or something, which isn't ideal preparation, but I have no regrets. It was such an amazing experience, and one that I didn't get to have at the Rio Olympics. We were still at our team camp when the opening ceremony was held. So, Yeah, it was a crazy preparation, and certainly I felt like I was just trying to find my feet a lot of the time and trying to fit everything in. But come race day, I felt like I was ready and able to just absorb the experience.
It's interesting you mentioned before about the opening ceremony. It's amazing how many people I've spoken to that ex-athletes and ex-Olympians, Jess, didn't actually march in the ceremony because, like we had, example, Patrick Jonker, who was an endurance cyclist. He wasn't able to. We had Rach Bug, who was like a diver, because they were competing in those first few days. So it feels like an amazing achievement and quite special that you're actually able to go to the ceremony.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think in Rio, we were actually in Florida, or we were still in America when it was on. And then in the Glasgow Commonwealth Games and also the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, for whatever reason, I couldn't march as well, whether it just wasn't ideal for preparation or I wasn't actually in the city at the time. But yeah, to have had that London experience was particularly special. I remember it very vividly, and just the anticipation of standing outside of the stadium waiting for Australia to be called. It was probably an hour or so while the actual spectacle was taking place, and we couldn't see it. So everyone afterwards just said the London opening ceremony was something else. There was, I think, a bit of Mary Poppins and all of these things going on, and we could just hear some noises, and then finally got to enter the stadium and there were just flashing lights everywhere.
Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I still reckon ours was the best in 2000.
Yeah,
so.
I remember that one. Yeah, Nikki Webster and Kathy lighting the cauldron. It was amazing.
Yeah, and all the other Aussie history and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely when you're an Aussie and just that feeling, knowing the history of everything we've been through, and it just sort of, I guess, maybe it is a biased thing, but I think that was definitely my favourite as well.
Yeah,
so, yeah. And 2012, when you're actually inside the village, Jess, what was that feeling like? Because I've heard some interesting stories before about water bomb fights. There was like Atlanta had about 9 McDonald's there. And what was your village experience like?
So I really loved the village. I was blown away when I entered the food hall for the first time. It's huge, and there's just every, country's cuisine on offer, and I love food. And obviously with a marathon coming up, I couldn't just go to town. I had to stick to my normal nutrition plan. And before the marathon, I have a very basic carbohydrate loaded diet. And, as much as I wanted to venture over to the Indian curries or the Japanese fish and I had to just wait until after my event to deviate from my normal sort of dinners and whatnot in the lead up to a race. So I remember the dream team entering the food hall and just really admiring the different physiques of the different athletes from all sorts of sports. You could try and guess, which sport an athlete, was involved with. And you go and you take your washing in down in this den. I don't even know, it was like a cellar sort of area, and you just cross paths with people who you idolised, and so often they look a bit nervous or they're really laid back and say hello. It's just it's an amazing experience to sort of all suddenly be in one place living together and feeling like you've got this special thing in common.
Do you sort of get selfies with them and that sort of thing? And like you mentioned, you sort of say g'day. Do you have a big conversation with some of these people, or you're just a bit too shy, or you're just too focused on your event?
I certainly felt with the Australians that you could strike up a conversation and, generally everyone's responsive. Although if it's clearly, you'll know when the cycling's on or when the swimming's on. And so if you see a cyclist or a swimming during their key competition time, you just let them go about their thing. You don't want to, potentially throw them on the morning of their event by holding them up or something. So you've got to pick your times to speak to athletes. But selfies and whatnot, you acknowledge that the athletes are probably copying a lot of that outside of the village, and you sort of respect that the village is their place to probably feel like they can just chill and not have that. But most people, when they see a Usain Bolt or someone like that, I think he laps it up. You can pick which athletes aren't, too worried about grabbing a quick selfie.
He seems like an absolute ripper. I'd like to meet him. So.
I met him in the lift at the 2017 World world champs. He was with the whole Jamaican sprint team, and
Oh, how
yeah,
good.
it was pretty cool.
And the actual event, Jess, the marathon event in 2012 and 2016, give us a bit of a feeling in terms of what the buzz was like competing in, your first marathon, firstly in 2012 and your second Olympics in 2016.
So in 2012, I was lining up, as I said, as a teammate with Benita Willis, my idol, and Lisa Waitman, another runner I'd really looked up to. And I just thought, let's learn as much as I can from these two athletes. So it started bucketing down just before our race. And then we sort of went out into the athlete area with, I think there were 138 competitors that day. And I saw my mum and dad in the stands and gave them a bit of a wave and sort of felt the warm fuzzies. And it was very surreal. The gun went and I just tried to find my pace and my rhythm, and we did 3 loops of the course. So I got to see mum and dad every time I came around. Although coming into the final lap, I think they were waiting in a coffee line somewhere. They got stuck, and so I didn't get to spot them on that lap. Then my sister was there, and, being London, there were a lot of Australians who had moved over to London who were out there on course. And I was a bit overwhelmed by the noise and the deep crowds, the entire way around the course. In Japan, there had been some quiet sections in that debut marathon. In London, it was just, there was energy and excitement everywhere, and there was nowhere to hide. You were just sort of on show, and there were cameras in your face. And I remember at one point feeling quite intimidated by it and almost had a little bit of a panic moment within the race, but was able to snap out of that and just focus on, I think, a landmark or something in the crowd and just get out of my thoughts to stop those emotions from spiraling and finish the race. What was my position? 38th or something like that. And I was pretty happy. I didn't really know what to expect. My time was close to a PB. And in Rio, I guess I was much a more mature athlete, and I'd done 2 in 2012, 1 in 2013, 2 2014. Yeah, I'd done probably 5 or so marathons by the time I lined up in Rio, and I'd had some injury challenges in the lead up to that one. It was known that it was going to be a hot and humid race, and it certainly was. So I lined up. I guess I had more expectations because I'd raced more marathons, but because of the injury challenges, I also knew that I probably hadn't prepared as in the way I would have hoped to. I did a lot of cross training and whatnot, but got out there and fought hard, and certainly, the heat slowed everyone down a bit, but I finished, what was I in that one? 21st out of 156. So I improved
phenomenal
in my position, but I still feel like, there's more to give. So I'd love to have the chance to compete at another Olympic Games, and hopefully would be able to get everything together and, have an optimal preparation and take all of the experiences and the mental strategies and the physical strengths that I've gained over time and put in a performance that I'd be really happy with.
And 2020 obviously we've seen a postponement from the Olympics from 2020 to 2021. How would have you dealt with it, Jess, if you were a present athlete, say, competing at this year's Olympics, knowing that it was going to be, postponed for 12 months?
I would have sat down with my team, like my coach, sports doctor, sports physio, exercise physiologist, strength and conditioning coach, and just mapped out the perfect preparation, as we saw it, given there was another 12 months. So it probably would have involved still racing a marathon if possible, although it probably wouldn't have been possible because of COVID in that April period. And then ideally probably would have looked to run another one in October of that year or early in 2021, and then have the Olympics it's early August is the marathon. And then we would have had a plan B if we couldn't do that, and a plan C, D. But, the main thing would probably have been avoiding injury. So obviously you peak your training and then suddenly the Olympics is postponed and you've got to plan some downtime and then rebuild. It's quite it's an event where you can't just keep on going here. You do have to have some fluctuations in your load, and that's for mental and physical purposes. So it's certainly difficult, but I think for the marathoners it was an opportunity to just build more layers of strength, and probably for the sprinters the delay would have caused more problems because, as you get older, you sometimes can lose a little bit of power and whatnot. But for the endurance athletes, generally, you can just keep on layering the strength.
So at 41, there's still hope for me to be a marathon runner at the Olympics.
Absolutely. No, but there really is.
And getting back to yourself, we spoke earlier about having Billy. Now, going forward, what happens with you, Jess? You tried to do the Gold Coast Marathon. Unfortunately, that got cancelled because of bloody COVID. Going forward now, what's going to happen? What do you have to do to make it to Paris in 3 years' time?
That's a great question. So you kind of think, well, if it's a world with COVID and a world without COVID, let's say COVID settles or everyone's vaccinated and, international travel sort of resumes in 2022. In early 2023, the qualification period would probably open up for the marathon. So ideally, I'd try and run one in, April-ish of 2023 and maybe, in our spring of that year too, and then potentially even in early 2024 and across those performances try and post a qualifier. But it's, the depth of Australian distance running is incredible. It's probably the best it's been in a very long time, if not ever at the moment. So it's not just about getting the qualifying time, but actually securing your place in the top three because each country can only take up to 3 athletes, female and male. So
that makes it hard. I guess it's great about the depth, but like you said, makes it challenging, doesn't it? I guess you have to just compete at your absolute best and do your best. Whatever happens.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And for the marathoners we have typically relied a lot on international competitions to post qualifying times. There are a few races in Australia where it's known to have, ideal sort of conditions and course. But yeah, if one of those events gets cancelled, you're left with few options. So it has been a little bit tricky for the marathoners through this time, but we'll see.
And you've got a great business called Rundies Undies. Tell us more about that and how that's going, Jess.
Yeah, well, that's been going for a while now. So I think, started selling them in early 2016. The idea, I guess, was stemmed from, me wanting to have just consistent, comfortable running undies available. And then my brother, Jack, was saying, I play footy and bathe like Speedos. So, some good footy undies would be good too. And then my husband Dylan was all excited and said, well, let's start a business and hopefully it'll enable us to give back to the running community in some way with time. And so that's been our goal all along with it is, one, it fulfilled our needs, but two, we've been able to support some runners and get to know more runners. We've been able to go to events and set up stalls, provide prizes for running groups and running events, and it's just a hobby. But yeah, we sort of do what we can with it with the time we've got, and we'd like to keep evolving it. But certainly it's been busy over the past 12 months, so it just sort of ticks along in the background, and I enjoy packing the orders and writing a little note and sending them off. And we've got some very loyal customers. So, yeah, it's been fun.
And you've got a website as well that people can sort of find out about it, Jess? Give that a plug.
Sure, www.rundies.com.au.
There you go, and I'll make sure I do that on the socials for you as well.
Thanks.
So, and before we let you go, going forward after your running career is finished, Jess, you mentioned you wouldn't mind having some more kids down the track. What else is going forward? Where do you see the future for Jess Trengove?
It's a great question. I think about it a bit. I try to work out sort of what I want to get out of life, and I really do enjoy inspiring people to be active. I just, an active lifestyle puts you in touch with so many great people, with nature, and it just has these ripple effects. Generally, you start to make healthier lifestyle choices when you're wanting to feel good exercising. And so something that helps me to achieve that, my physio work is one way to do it, but I love speaking at schools and to groups. I'm not quite sure what it will look like in the future, but if I'm achieving that, then I'll be happy.
Well, you're a bit of a media gun, so maybe we could see you as a commentator down the track or something, perhaps. So
yeah, at this stage, I'm quite specific with my knowledge for marathon running. I'd be a little bit nervous stepping outside of the long distance running realm, but I'd certainly, if I could get the opportunity to do some research and learn about other events, I'd love to do some sort of sports commentary. And, with the Tokyo Olympics coming up, hopefully there'll be a few little opportunities to do some of that while our Aussie athletes are competing. We've got a really strong team this year, and it's very exciting.
Super exciting indeed. Let's all hope it goes ahead this year, 2021. We need it. Everyone just wants it to go ahead, well, except for maybe the Tokyo locals perhaps, but majority of people want it to go ahead. So I think it'll be fantastic for everyone. And after the last 12 months, it's just what we need, I reckon, Jess.
Yeah.
So, hey, thank you so much for joining us today on the road to Tokyo. It's been a pleasure having you on. Just hearing such an amazing insight into your experience with the Olympics, and we look forward to speaking in the future and wish you all the best going forward.
Thanks, Bevan.